Deep within the amber glow of a fading memory lies a revelation that has the power to change your entire future. We revisit the turning points of life to find the lessons that still matter in the modern world. Subscribe today and rediscover the beauty of the past. My accountant called me on a Tuesday morning. I was in the middle of my second cup of coffee, watching the birds at the feeder my late wife had hung outside the kitchen window 17 years ago. I almost didn't pick up. It was early, and I had learned to be careful about early calls. "Mr. Harlan," he said, and his voice had that particular flatness I had come to associate with bad news. "I need you to come in. Today, if possible. Come alone. And please don't mention this to your son." I set my coffee cup down. "What's this about, Dale?" He paused. "I'd rather show you in person. It's better that way." I told him I'd be there by 10. I had known Dale Frenner for 22 years. He had handled my taxes when I was still running 3 landscaping trucks out of my garage, and he had stayed with me through every expansion, the equipment yard, the commercial contracts, the property I bought in 2009 when everyone else was selling. He was not a dramatic man. He did not call clients early on Tuesdays and ask them to come alone unless something was genuinely wrong. I drove downtown with the radio off. "Let me tell you about my son before I tell you what Dale showed me. My son's name is Kevin. He's 34 years old. He was a quiet child, studious, the kind of boy who did his homework without being asked, and kept his room clean and made his mother proud in all the small, visible ways that mothers notice. When my wife, Carol, passed 4 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end, Kevin was the one who sat beside her bed those last nights. He held her hand. He read to her. I could barely walk into that room without my chest seizing up, and Kevin was the one who made it bearable for both of us. After Carol died, I asked Kevin to come work with me. I thought it would be good for both of us. I had built Harlan Grounds Management into something real. 41 employees, contracts with 3 hospital systems, a city parks maintenance agreement that renewed every 2 years without fail. I needed someone I trusted. Kevin had a business degree he wasn't using, and he had his mother's steadiness. It felt right. That was 3 years ago. I made him operations manager. I gave him access to the scheduling systems, the vendor accounts, the client communications. I introduced him to everyone as my right hand. I told our biggest clients he was being groomed to take over someday. I meant every word of it. His girlfriend, Priya, moved in with him about 18 months ago. She was pleasant enough at dinners, asked polite questions, laughed at the right moments. My granddaughter from my older daughter adored her. I had no reason to think anything was wrong. Dale's office was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like old carpet and decent coffee. His assistant waved me through without asking me to wait, which was unusual. Dale was standing when I came in. He shook my hand and gestured at the chair across from his desk. And then he sat down and folded his hands and looked at me the way a doctor looks at you before he explains the scan results. "I want to show you something," he said, "and I want you to understand that I found this by accident. While I was reconciling the Q3 vendor payments, I wasn't looking for anything." He turned his monitor toward me. On the screen was a spreadsheet. I recognized our vendor payment log, the one Kevin managed. But the column on the right, the one that should have shown approved vendor names, had entries I didn't recognize. 11 of them, going back 14 months. "These vendors," Dale said, pointing carefully, "do not appear in any of your contracts. I searched your client database, your equipment suppliers, your subcontractor list. Nothing. So I pulled the actual payment records from the bank." He slid a paper across the desk. It was a bank statement, and he had highlighted 6 transactions in yellow. Each one was between $4,000 and $9,000. Each one was paid to something called Clearview Operations LLC. I had my assistant do a business registry search, Dale said. Clearview Operations LLC was registered in Delaware 14 months ago. He slid another paper across. The registered agent was a name I didn't know, but the listed business address was the same as my son's apartment. I sat with that for a moment. The air in the room felt different, like the pressure had changed. "How much total?" I asked. $63,400, Dale said. Over 14 months. I looked at the papers on the desk. I looked at the window behind Dale's head, where the parking garage across the street was half in shadow. Does anyone else know about this? I asked. No. I called you first. I nodded slowly. I picked up the bank statement and looked at the highlighted lines again. 14 months. While Kevin was sitting across from me at Sunday dinners, asking about the Riverside Hospital contract, reminding me to take my blood pressure medication. I need copies of everything, I said. And I need you to keep this between us for now. Dale was already printing. I did not go home after I left Dale's office. I drove to the parking lot of a grocery store 3 miles away and sat in my truck and thought about what I knew and what I didn't know and what it meant. What I knew. $63,000 had moved out of my company into an account connected to my son's address. The transfers had been authorized through the vendor payment system Kevin controlled. They were structured to stay under $10,000 each, which told me the structuring was intentional. What I didn't know, whether Priya was involved, whether Kevin had been planning this from the moment I asked him to come work with me, or whether it had started as something smaller and grown, whether there was more I hadn't found yet. I sat in that parking lot for 40 minutes. I watched a woman load groceries into her car. I watched a man in a delivery uniform eat a sandwich on the curb. I thought about Kevin reading to Carol in that hospital bed. I thought about the way he'd hugged me at the funeral and said, "We'll get through this, Dad. I promise." Then I called my attorney. Her name is Margaret, and she has been handling my business affairs since I incorporated in 2004. She listened without interrupting while I explained what Dale had found. When I finished, she was quiet for 3 seconds. "Don't confront him yet," she said. "And don't change anything in the systems. Don't lock him out. Don't alter access. We need to document what exists right now before anyone has a chance to claim they don't know what you're talking about." "What do I do in the meantime?" "You go home," she said. "You act completely normal. I'll call Dale this afternoon and start building the paper trail. Give me a week." I told her I'd do my best. That week was the hardest thing I have done since I sat in a hospital parking garage and called our children to tell them their mother was gone. I went into the office 3 times. I had lunch with Kevin on Thursday at the sandwich place near our equipment yard. I watched him talk about a new client we were bidding, a retirement community in the east suburbs, 3 acres of ornamental plantings. Good money. He was enthusiastic. He had done the research, prepared the estimate, even driven out to walk the property himself. He looked like my son. He sounded like my son. He had stolen $63,000 from me over 14 months. Margaret called me on a Friday afternoon, 9 days after I had sat in Dale's office. "I have everything," she said. "Dale found 2 more transactions that were missed in the first pass. Total is now $71,200. And there's something else." She paused. "We pulled Kevin's email access logs from your company server. I had your IT contractor do it. 6 weeks ago, Kevin forwarded 3 documents to a personal email address. The documents were your full client list, your 2 largest contracts, and your equipment asset inventory." I sat down. "He was building a picture of what the company is worth," Margaret said. "Harlan, I think this was preparation. Not just for the money he was taking for something larger. Like what? Possibly a valuation. If someone were trying to understand what percentage of a business they might inherit, or trying to assess what a buyout might look like, these are exactly the documents you'd want." I thought about the Sunday dinners, the way Priya asked careful questions about the company, which clients had been with us the longest, whether the city contract was locked in or year to year. I had thought she was just being interested, engaged, trying to understand my world. "What are my options?" I asked. "Termination for cause, with full documentation. Civil recovery of the funds. Possible criminal referral, that's your choice, and you don't have to decide today. But first, you need to meet with me and Dale together, so we have everything organized before you do anything else." We met the following Monday. I sat in Margaret's conference room and went through every document, every transfer, every access log. Seeing it all laid out together was different from seeing the pieces separately. It wasn't an accident or a lapse. It was a system. 14 months of small, careful moves, each one staying just below the threshold that might trigger an automatic alert. My son had built a system to steal from me. I asked Margaret the question I had been carrying for 2 weeks. Do I call the police? She looked at me evenly. You can. The documentation supports it. But that decision is yours, and it's permanent. Once it's in the system, you can't take it back. I thought about what that meant. Not for Kevin. I was past protecting Kevin from consequences. I thought about Kevin's older sister, my daughter Rebecca, who had 2 kids and a husband who traveled for work and didn't need a holiday dinner that felt like a crime scene. I thought about Carol, who would have been devastated not by what Kevin did, she had a clear enough eye for human failure, but by what a criminal filing would do to the family's ability to ever find its way back to something functional. I decided to give Kevin one chance to respond before I made that call, but I was not going to give him that chance on his terms. I called him on a Wednesday evening and asked him to come by the house Saturday morning. I said I wanted to go over some financial paperwork before the end of the year, that it was routine, that it wouldn't take long. He said, "Sure, Dad, no problem. I'll bring coffee." He showed up at 9:15 with 2 cups from the place on Elmwood. He was wearing a jacket I hadn't seen before. He looked relaxed. He kissed me on the side of the head the way he had since he was a teenager. We sat at the kitchen table. I let him set down the coffees. I let him take off his jacket. Then I put the folder Margaret had prepared on the table between us and I said, "I need you to look at this with me." He opened the folder. I watched his face. I had been watching people's faces for 63 years, and I had learned that the first half second tells you almost everything. Kevin's face went me through 3 things, in rapid succession: recognition, calculation, and then a careful settling into neutral. That calculation, that half second of deciding how to play it, is something I will not forget. "Dad, I can explain." "Don't," I said. "I've had 2.5 weeks to look at this. Margaret has had 2.5 weeks. Dale has had 2.5 weeks. I don't need an explanation. I need you to understand what I know. I went through it. The vendor payments. The shell company at his address. The document transfers 6 weeks ago. I watched him try twice to find an angle, once suggesting the transfers were for a subcontractor he'd been vetting informally, once saying the document transfers were for a business development idea he was going to bring to me. Both times I put the relevant paper in front of him and waited until he stopped talking. At some point he stopped trying to explain and just sat there. "What are you going to do?" he said finally. His voice was quiet. "I already did it," I said. "Your access to all company systems was revoked this morning. You've been terminated for cause, which is documented in writing. A demand letter for repayment of $71,200 went out from Margaret's office on Friday. You have 30 days to respond." He looked up. "The criminal referral," I said, "is something I haven't decided yet. That decision will be informed by whether you cooperate fully and whether repayment is made." He looked down at the table. His coffee was sitting there untouched, still steaming slightly. I thought he started. "I know what you thought," I said. "You thought you were getting an advance on something that was going to be yours eventually anyway. You told yourself a story about it that made it feel like less than what it was." He didn't answer. "It was theft," I said. "From me. From the 41 people who work for this company and depend on its solvency. And it was a lie that lasted 14 months, during which you sat at my table, in my house, and talked to me like my son." The kitchen was very quiet. A car went by outside. The bird feeder swayed slightly in the wind. "I want you to leave now," I said. "Talk to a lawyer before you respond to Margaret's letter." He stood up slowly. He picked up his jacket. He started to say something twice and stopped both times. Then he walked to the front door and I heard it close, and his car started in the driveway, and I sat at my kitchen table alone. I poured his untouched coffee into the sink. I stood at the window where Carol's bird feeder hung, and I watched 2 juncos peck at the seeds, completely indifferent to everything. I had a conversation with my daughter Rebecca 2 weeks later.
I told her what had happened. Not all of it, just enough. She cried. She was angry in the complicated way that people are angry when they have to be angry at someone they love and they don't want to have to choose sides. I told her she didn't have to choose sides. I told her Kevin was still her brother. What had happened was between him and me. "Are you okay, Dad?" she asked. I thought about how to answer that honestly. "I built that company from nothing," I said. 30 years of early mornings and late bids and equipment loans and handshakes with clients who could have gone somewhere else. Your mother packed lunches for me when we couldn't afford the diner near the job sites. I built it for our family. And when I found out someone was stealing from it, I protected it. So yes, I'm okay. She was quiet for a moment. "Mom would have been so sad," she said. "I know," I said. "But she also would have been furious. And then she would have expected me to handle it properly." So that's what I did. Kevin retained an attorney. The repayment arrangement was structured over 18 months. The criminal referral, after consultation with Margaret and a long conversation with myself, was not filed, but the documentation remains preserved, and Margaret made certain Kevin's attorney understood that. I hired a new operations manager, a woman named Christine who had spent 12 years running logistics for a commercial landscaping company in another state. She found 2 vendor contracts within her first month that we had been overpaying for years. She reorganized the scheduling system. She is meticulous and direct, and she does not take things that don't belong to her. I changed my estate documents. I worked with Margaret on a structure that is clear, legally sound, and does not leave room for interpretation or quiet repositioning. It should have been that way from the beginning. That part is on me. Some mornings I still sit with my coffee and look out at Carol's bird feeder and think about what I got wrong. Not about handling it. I handled it the way it needed to be handled. I think about the earlier years. Whether I gave too much, too easily. Whether I confused being generous with being a good father. And whether those 2 things had drifted apart without me noticing. I don't have a clean answer to that. I'm 64 years old and I raised 2 children and I worked every day of my adult life and I still don't have a clean answer to that. What I know is this. You can love someone completely and still hold them accountable. Those 2 things can exist at the same time. The love doesn't make the accountability optional. If anything, it makes it more necessary because you are the person who taught them that actions have consequences. And if you don't hold that line, you are the one who told them the lesson wasn't real. Carol knew that. She was better at it than I was. I'm learning. The bird feeder needs refilling. I keep meaning to do it in the mornings and then the day gets away from me. But I'll get to it. I still have time.